So I wanted to talk today a little bit about Jayapataka Swami and my relationship with Jayapataka and how it's kind of developed over the years and whether it's been a rough or smooth relationship. I really didn't have much contact with Jayapataka. He was in India, I was in England, and we didn't really connect very much on a personal level. My first contact with him personally was in 1979 when he came to England after Jaitirtha, the so-called guru of England, was falling down and having all kinds of problems. So Jayapataka came, and at the time he was trying to rectify the problem. And the problem with Jaitirtha was that he was having illicit sex with a follower while he was claiming to be a guru. He was claiming to be a pure devotee, a servant of Radharani, a servant of Krishna, and he was the guru successor to Krishna and all the acharyas, including Srila Prabhupada. And at the time, the leaders of ISKCON had established that Jaitirtha should have his own Vyasa seat, a Vyasa-san seat. So there was a Vyasa-san in the temple with a picture of Jaitirtha, and he was being worshipped simultaneously with Prabhupada. So they were equalizing Jaitirtha and Srila Prabhupada as co-equal gurus in the parampara. So this was a big crisis, one of the first really big crises they had after 1978, after they declared that they were gurus and that 11 people, 11 leaders of ISKCON had been appointed as gurus. Now my problem was that I was always questioning, how did these 11 become gurus? In the first place, they claimed they had been appointed. I asked for evidence of this appointment, and no evidence was ever shown, ever. They did give me a little mimeograph paper. Vichitravirya Prabhu gave me this mimeograph paper with a couple of sentences on it, which was obviously lifted out of a much larger conversation. But I didn't see any appointment of 11 gurus. No names were mentioned in these two sentences, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of discrepancies with their evidence, and there's been a lot of discrepancies ever since. There's no actual proof that 11 people were appointed as Prabhupada's successors, Krishna's successors, as pure devotees, as people who are equal to Jesus, who can absorb sins like Jesus, and so on. There's no evidence that Prabhupada indicated they were on that level. First of all, in January 1977, Srila Prabhupada said they are not fit for sannyas. No more sannyas, they're making a laughing stock of sannyas. And sannyas is a renounced order. So if they could not maintain the renounced order, then how could they simply 12 months later, in January 1978, become pure devotees? That didn't make any sense. They're not fit for the renounced order in January 1977, but they are fit to be equals to Jesus as Krishna's successors 12 months later. That didn't add up. But the other problem is that Srila Prabhupada would have mentioned this appointment of 11. He would have made it very clear to the whole society, I'm going to be appointing these 11, they'll be worshipped in such and such way, and it will all be administered in such and such process. But Prabhupada never mentioned that he was appointing 11 successors. Of course, even if Prabhupada had appointed some kind of successors, once they were having illicit sex and taking drugs, like Jaitirtha was doing at that time, then that order would have ended. The order to be a policeman is only as good as long as you are acting like a policeman. If you're ordained to be a policeman and you start robbing the bank, then you're no longer a policeman. You've lost your status. So even if Prabhupada appointed them in certain capacity, they were obviously failing. So they were no longer qualified to be in the post of guru. So anyway, Jayapataka came, and I was expecting that Jayapataka would say, well, yes, Jayatirtha is falling down. He's having illicit sex, he's taking drugs, he's causing all kinds of problems. So we can't allow him to be in the post of guru in ISKCON. Guru means a pure devotee, he's not acting purely, he has to be removed. And actually, there was a photo of Jayatirtha having sex. This was not known by a lot of people, but a woman had gone into the bushes where Deviated was supposed to be in samadhi, and he was having sex. She took a photo, and this photo was circulated around to a few of the leaders at the time. I heard about the photo. So, in other words, there was direct evidence that Deviated was having illicit sex, and it was being discussed by the senior devotees of England, the Yatra, or the area. So a lot of people knew about it, were discussing it. The leaders, like Jayapataka, certainly knew about it. In addition, Jayapataka was screaming and yelling from his Vyasasan, so it was evident that he was taking some very serious intoxications. And there was a rumor that he was offering LSD to his Shalagram deity, and he started to say that LSD was the foot dust of Radharani. He wanted to make LSD the new dispensation for the Hare Krishna religion, and he said that. He said, we have to change the society, we're too stiff, we're too strict, we need to loosen up, we need to introduce LSD. And Jayapataka had formerly been a disciple of Timothy Leary, who was the LSD guru. So he was taking intoxication, he was giving intoxication to his senior leader circle, and this was just out of control. So there was a bunch of tapes, audio tapes of Jayapataka yelling and screaming on the Vyasasan. And so Jayapataka he had a big meeting with the devotees, and he says, all of the tapes of Jayapataka yelling, shouting, and screaming have to be submitted to us. We're confiscating all these tapes, and anyone who is still in possession of these tapes after we leave will be kicked out of ISKCON. So they were gathering the evidence that Jayapataka was severely intoxicated, yelling and screaming, and instead of saying this is a big problem, they wanted to just round up the evidence so that later they could just deny that any of this ever happened. That's basically what they did. So everybody had to send in their tapes. Of course, we all remember what those tapes were. Jayapataka was yelling, screaming, and acting like a lunatic while he was sitting on his Vyasa seat. We all witnessed that. We all saw that. At one time, a devotee named Tulsi went and pulled the microphone plug out from Jayapataka to stop the sound from coming out. So he was laughing, and a lot of people were laughing, and they were saying, oh yeah, he's Deviated, he's stoned on drugs. So he's sitting on a Vyasasan, he's being worshipped as good as God, but he's having illicit sex, he's taking drugs, he's yelling and screaming, he's behaving like a lunatic. So we got to remove this guy. We can't have this person posing as God's successor. But Jayapataka said, no, we have to keep Jayapataka. We're going to keep him in the post of guru. He is a guru. He's Krishna's successor. He's a servant of Radharani. We have to accept that. And if we don't accept that, we have to leave ISKCON. So this was one of the first big cover-ups that they launched. Already in 1979, it was an early problem that was already out of control. And instead of controlling it, they allowed it to continue. And they just, suspended Jayapataka temporarily for a short time, and then reinstated him and put him back in the post of God's successor. So I was challenging the whole operation on many levels. I said we can't offer food to a photo of Jayapataka because he's a contaminated person. I said we will be cheating the public if we tell the public that this person is a pure devotee when we know he isn't. And Prabhupada was very vehement that we should never cheat the public. But here we are wholesale cheating the public, telling the public the Jayapataka is a pure devotee, he's as good as Jesus, he can absorb your sins, and so on. So this cheating was never approved by Prabhupada. And I also said we shouldn't be having our children, the ISKCON children, worshiping a person who is engaged in illicit sex and drugs, because you become what you worship. So if our children are worshiping illicit sex and drugs, that will give them a propensity to engage in illicit sex and drugs themselves, because they will become what they are worshiping. And that came to pass. We had a big problem with the children of ISKCON falling down into illicit sex and drugs after 1979. There was a lot of problems, not only with the children, but many of the followers of Jayapataka started taking drugs, started selling drugs, and he, in fact, became a big drug enterprise. So, meanwhile, Jayapataka, he's insisting that Jayapataka must stay in the guru post, and anyone who objects will have to leave ISKCON. So I was going to have to leave, but just before I was leaving, I got a call from Jayapataka, and he said, we have had a discussion. We means Jayapataka, Jayapataka, Bhagavan, Ramachar, maybe they were the 4 leaders there at the time, or maybe they talked with others, I don't know. But anyway, they offered to make me the guru of Ireland. You become the guru of Ireland. You go along with our program. You'll be a guru. You'll be like us. So now I'm thinking, wait a minute. They're making an illicit sex and drugs person into a guru, and now they're also going to make me a guru? I'm going to be a guru in the illicit sex and drugs guru parampara. That makes no sense. So this showed to me how arrogant Jayapataka and Jayapataka and these guys were. They're now thinking that they're authorized to make successors to God. But my understanding is that God makes his own successors. God authorizes his own police department. He says, you are going to be a policeman on my behalf. You don't get to decide who is going to be God's policeman and who is not. That's not your job. It comes from a higher authority. That's my understanding all along, and it still is my understanding. So how did these guys think we're going to make Jayapataka a guru, a successor to God, and we're going to make me, Paranjan, another successor, and I'm going to be the successor for Ireland? And that also makes no sense, because the guru is the guru for the Jagat, the universe. He's the universal guru of everyone. He's not the guru of Ireland or the guru of England, and so on and so forth. So this was another defect in their idea, that they thought the guru has some geographical area. So to resolve all this, they decided to consult with Sridhara Maharaj, and Sridhara Maharaj was the leader of a bisexual guru deviation in 1936. He was Prabhupada's godbrother, but he had a tendency to promote deviated people as the successors to Krishna. So Sridhar Maharaj emerged as the sort of go-to advisor for the leaders at the time. Although Srila Prabhupada had said repeatedly that Sridhar Maharaj is a lot of trouble, we shouldn't consult with Sridhar Maharaj because he has severe misconceptions. And this was one of his misconceptions. He was told that Jayapataka is having illicit sex, and he's taking intoxication, and he's posing as a guru, and Sridhar Maharaj said, well, he must stay in the post of guru. What's the problem? He's God's successor. He's having all these problems. Let's just keep him there. So where's the purity? There's no purity. There's no idea that the guru must be qualified. The only qualification is that we are going to rubber stamp this guy we're going to approve this guy and we're going to cram this guy down your throat, whether he's qualified or not. Qualification was no longer the issue. Now, some people assume that Jayapataka already knew that Sridhar Maharaj had sympathy for illicit sex gurus or unqualified gurus, and that is why he started consulting with Sridhar and sent ISKCON over to consult with Sridhar. Jayapataka announced that Sridhar Maharaj is the senior most advisor for ISKCON, and we all have to go to Sridhar for advice. And Sridhar's advice was, no one should protest. None should protest, so we shouldn't protest when gurus are having illicit sex and taking drugs. None should protest. So Jayapataka used Sridhar as his backup. That's what he was saying. Well, Sridhar said this, and Sridhar said that, and Sridhar said the other, and Sridhar says you shouldn't be protesting, so don't protest. So we believe that there was some coordination between some of the deviants from the Gaudiya Math and Jayapataka, probably even while Prabhupada was here. They were already consulting and plotting this whole thing out. That is what a number of people believe. Now, in addition, we believe Prabhupada was complaining of being poisoned. And Jayapataka is one of the speakers on these tapes. These are called the poison tapes, where Prabhupada is being asked about why he is feeling mental distress. And he says, I'm feeling mental distress because someone is giving me poison. And Jayapataka is on that tape. So we believe he was part of the plot to poison Prabhupada. That's our opinion, at least. So there's some consultation going on with people named as deviants by Prabhupada. Prabhupada names specifically Sridhar and says, do not consult with Sridhar. So Jayapataka goes there and consults with Sridhar, and then Sridhar becomes Jayatirtha's advisor and therapist, or whatever you want to call it. So then, really, Jayatirtha just forms a total spin-off movement. He just leaves ISKCON and starts his own program called the Peace Krishnas. And Sridhar Maharaj was a consultant, and he kept promoting the idea that Jayatirtha is a guru, should be continuing on as a guru. And so this created a schism, because the leaders of ISKCON eventually realized that more people were listening to Sridhar than they were listening to the ISKCON leaders. They kind of created their own Frankenstein monster. They made Sridhar the authority, and then people were going to Sridhar, and Sridhar was saying, well, the GBC is too heavy with Jayatirtha. They should allow Jayatirtha. What's the problem? And Sridhar saved two other gurus who were in trouble. Tamal Krishna and Hansaduta were on the verge of being suspended. And Sridhar says, oh no, don't do that. They're gurus. You can't be, upsetting the post of guru. Their disciples will be unhappy, blah, blah, blah. So Sridhar was the sort of fix-it person for their initial troubles, but Jayapataka is the person who introduced Sridhar in. He was the person who sent Nisarganandan over to start talking to Sridhar Maharaj, and that became the link of ISKCON with the Gaudiya Math. And the Gaudiya Math, Prabhupada had already explained, was a deviation because they made false gurus. So Jayapataka had Sridhar Maharaj ghost writing most of the original position papers of the ISKCON leadership at the time. And for example, Sridhar Maharaj says, if you want to be Krishna's pure devotee successor, you just wear the uniform, and the uniform will show you what to do. So you dress up like a pure devotee in a robe, and then you become a pure devotee. So this is called sahaja. Now in India there are sahajas. They dress up like the gopis. They dress up as women. There are men who dress up as women. They wear the dress of the gopis, and they think that makes them a gopi. So this is Sridhar Maharaj's infection. He is infected with this sahaja mentality. You dress up like a gopi, you are a gopi. You dress up like a brain surgeon, you are a brain surgeon. You dress up like an airline pilot. You go jump into the pilot seat and fly the the big giant Boeing airplane. That's not how it works. This is Sahaja, and Prabhupada was very, very, very critical of these people. And he said the Sahajas are gliding to hell because they're mixing up pure devotees, they're mixing up Radharani, they're mixing up Krishna with illicit behavior. So that was the first thing Sridhar Maharaj did, and Jayapataka was his backer and promoter and instigator and collaborator. They were working closely together. Now, they came up with a paper in 1980 called The Mahajans Have Difficulties, and this was another Sridhar Maharaj collaboration where they attacked the Mahajans. The Mahajans fall into illusion, and so we are falling into illusion. That was their whole theme and thesis. Now, another thing that began to happen was they started saying that Jayatirtha is the Maya Jayatirtha. The real Jayatirtha is serving Krishna purely, but what you are seeing now is the Maya Jayatirtha, and this is just like Mother Sita. Mother Sita has the real Sita and the Maya Sita. So Jayatirtha, who is falling down, is the Maya Jayatirtha. So notice what they're doing. They're dragging in Radharani and her expansion as Sita, and they're attacking her character. Mother Sita is an expansion of Radharani. She has no connection to illicit sex and drugs and all the rest of it. They just don't compare. Then there was another problem right away as well. Jayatirtha is falling down because he's taking karma. He's acting like Jesus. He's taking your sins. So the followers began to say, oh, Jayatirtha has taken our sins, and that's why he's falling down. He's suffering from taking sins. Well, yeah, but Prabhupada said we cannot take sins, or we will fall down, or we will get sick, or both. And of course, a number of them died, and died prematurely. Now, it's interesting that later on, Jayatirtha, what became the biggest distributor of the drug ecstasy in England. He started a whole drug selling operation with his spin-off from the Krishna religion, the Peace Krishnas. They were selling this drug and distributing this drug all over Europe. And one of Jayatirtha's disciples became very infuriated that Jayatirtha was having sex with the wife of a follower, and so he chopped off Jayatirtha's head, slowly chopped off his head with a dull knife. So he was covered with blood, and the police came in, and he said, my job is done. So he believed he had to stop Jayatirtha because Jayatirtha was acting sinfully in the name of Guru. And well, he was right that Jayatirtha was acting incorrectly. Of course, we're not recommending taking these measures, but this was the result. So if they had stopped Jayatirtha from being an Acharya, then Jayatirtha would have lived. Maybe he would still be alive today. Nobody knows. But by cramming sinful activities onto him, by claiming he can absorb sins, they killed him. You could say they killed him. And then there was big headlines all over the European press, media, newspapers. Guru's head hacked off. Well, wait a minute, he's not a guru. But ISKCON didn't even complain. ISKCON didn't even say, hey, wait a minute, he was never a guru. You shouldn't say Guru's head hacked off. He is not a guru. But they didn't bother. They didn't think that's the problem. Yeah, he was a guru. And gurus have sex with followers. Gurus sell drugs. Gurus take drugs. Gurus fall down. And gurus get killed by their infuriated disciples for cheating those disciples. That's what happens with gurus. No, that is not what happens with gurus. But that is what happens with Jayapataka's gurus. Okay? And, of course, other gurus, many other gurus in the Jayapataka regime had problems. Swarup Damodar had like a stroke. He was half paralyzed. This was early on. This happened very early on, in the early 80s. He had a stroke. And it was the same thing. They said, well, he's taking sins. He's one of our gurus. He's taking sins, so he's suffering from taking sins. But no, he has no authority to take anyone's sins. And Prabhupada says these false gurus take all those sins with them into the next life, and they go to the lowest hells in the universe. They go to the most obnoxious regions of the universe. They take the most obnoxious births in the most obnoxious region. So they become born as very low species in low planets. That is what happens. So taking karma from others is not authorized. You can't just go around and claim to be another Jesus and take sins from other people. And then Vipramukhya complained that he was feeling sick every time he initiated people. Satsvarup had headaches, and he said that was from taking sins. Antaduta had headaches, and he said that's from taking sins. And there's a long list of people claiming that they were having problems, including Shivaram Swami, who says he's in constant pain because he has been taking sins. So Jayapataka wanted this. He wanted these conditioned souls to take sins, and then they would have to suffer and maybe even get their head chopped off. And now he's promoting the idea that women should take this position. Women should become Diksha gurus and take sins, knowing that they fall down and have all these problems, and they suffer, and they may die. Oh, well, let's make thousands of women into Diksha gurus so they'll have all these same problems that these men are having. So he's suffering. Jayapataka had a stroke. He's been suffering like a dog ever since. He can't hardly walk. He can't hardly pass stool. He's bleeding from the abdomen. He's unable to hardly walk or speak or do anything because of his stroke. And he wants others to have the same experience. Look what happened to me. Let's expand this to thousands and thousands of other people. And did we forget to mention that there was a mass child molesting problem under Jayapataka's zone in Mayapur? Mayapur was famous for having children beaten, starved, and having so many problems, including being molested, mass molested. So Sulochana said that Jayapataka is the leader of the anal reconstruction surgery of children Guru Sampradaya, because a number of these children were getting anal reconstructive surgery after they had been raped. So what kind of guru orchestrates a situation like that? How can that be guru? Well, he is a guru if you accept that Jayapataka is a guru. Now, Jayapataka has a prominent disciple, a sannyas disciple named Bhakti Vikas Swami. And Bhakti Vikas Swami is working very closely right now with the people who are keeping a known pedophile in the guru seat in India. So how can a pedophile be the successor to God? How can a pedophile be the servant of Radharani and all the rest of it? So this is the result of Jayapataka's preaching. He has been preaching all along. The gurus are conditioned souls. The gurus are falling down left, right, and center. And one of the spokespersons for the Jayapataka programs, his name is Jayapataka Swami. He says that in ISKCON, their gurus may be found engaged in illicit sex with man, woman, and possibly children. So how many people believe that the successors to God, the successors to Jesus, the successors to pure devotees are engaged in illicit sex with men, women, and children? So this is the problem that Jayapataka has created. He has created a false standard for God and God's successor and servants of Radharani and all the rest of it. He has created mass confusion by introducing all these bogus ideas. Now, later on, Jayapataka launched what turned out to be a $20 million lawsuit. Supposedly, allegedly $20 million was spent suing the Bangalore devotees because the Bangalore devotees rejected Jayapataka and they just wanted to worship actual pure devotees like Prabhupada. So Jayapataka had them sued in the Supreme Court of India. And they were spending millions and millions and millions of dollars suing these Bangalore devotees. And the followers of Jayapataka told me that's not a problem. They would spend $100 million and sue Bangalore for 100 years if necessary. That's no problem at all. Okay, so devotees' children were being starved, didn't have soap, didn't have blankets, didn't have clothes, didn't have basic supplies, at least according to their testimony. When ISKCON was sued for child molesting, there was a lot of deprived necessities for children, but there is $100 million on hand for a lawsuit to sue the Bangalore devotees, and Bangalore devotees are running a free food program that feeds children in India. And Jayapataka's people were openly saying, we want to have the directors of this free food program put into jail. So they want to stop a free food program that's feeding poor children, which is feeding millions and millions of children, actually. So first of all, they were sued. Jayapataka's program was sued for $400 million in Texas for, among other things, starving the children, not feeding them properly. And so now Jayapataka wants to starve millions of children. We were sued for $400 million for starving children. Let's spend $20 million so we can starve millions of children. That's the whole plan here. So how can Jayapataka be a guru when every time we turn around, children are suffering, children are starving, children are being beaten and molested and all the rest of it? And there's also a lot of old devotees who have health problems and all kinds of problems. They're living in their car, they're living under a tree, and there's no money for these senior devotees. But there's tons of money to buy new Mercedes for lawyers in the Jayapataka scheme. Then there was the incident where the cows on one of the Jayapataka farms in the USA were not being fed properly because there was no money being given to this project. And so the man in charge of the cows took the cows to the slaughterhouse and sold them at the auction because he didn't want to see these cows just suffer and starve to death and not be cared properly. So these cows were being neglected and they ended up being killed. And I agreed with the cowherd person that it's better to kill a living entity than to make it suffer. That's horrible, making something suffer. So notice, there's $100 million in Jayapataka's back pocket to sue the free food program people in India, but there isn't $100 to buy a bale of hay for his cows. So he's neglecting the citizens so he can have millions of dollars on hand for lawsuits, so that he can sue the Vaishnava devotees of God. Vaishnava devotee of God, he wants that person banned, beaten, removed, exiled, sued, molested, and he's a guru. So as of this recording, Jayapataka is now very sick, again in the hospital. He's been hospitalized over and over and over again. He's had organs removed and replaced, all kinds of things. He's just hanging on and hanging on and hanging on and hoping he doesn't die because he knows he's going to be meeting the Yamadutas, I believe. I think that's what he knows. That's why he is so desperate to cling to here, because he knows his future is not going to be good. Anyway, we're not really counting on him making an admission that all this was a big mistake and it was a crime against ISKCON and a crime against Prabhupada and so on and so forth. That probably won't happen. And it's very similar with many of my godbrothers. Many of my godbrothers went along with this whole thing. They criticized me, they attacked me, and they even got very upset when I was having ISKCON sued for child molesting, because at the time the children were committing suicide. They said, so what? Let the kids die. Nobody cares. They just didn't care about ISKCON or the children or Prabhupada or Krishna or anything else. And now they're getting old and they're just dying and they don't say anything. They don't admit this was all wrong. We should never have allowed this to happen to Krishna's movement. Krishna is God. He is the all-pure personality. We should not allow contamination in his society, or we are implicated. We are guilty of allowing this to happen. Anyway, I could go on here and on and on and on here, but you get the idea. This is just pointing the way. We don't believe these people are gurus. We don't believe any of them ever were qualified to be gurus or appointed to be gurus or anything else. And the whole thing is just basically a scam to make money and exploit ISKCON. And I hope this helps clear things up for people. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Bol.